Hello, everybody. Good to see you again. Haven't done that in weeks. I can't see you, but you can see me. It's a common culture phrase. You want to come out and say, look, you want to look out the window? Want to come? Come? What? Oh, he's chilling. Scout's here with me, my sidekick. He's doing pretty good. Arthritic aches and pains notwithstanding, he's doing pretty well. As am I, for an old guy. And I have to, like you, I have to work at staying steady as I watch and see and sense and feel and discern and experience all the stuff that's going on around us. I think last time when I opened in prayer, I talked about God as the rock on whom we stand. If he wasn't there, boys and girls, probably be back at the bars knocking back rusty nails. But he's there. He's there, and he's here today. So, Father, in the name of Jesus, been another interesting morning. Always is on broadcast days. We thank you and praise you for your being there. Steady, firm, reliable, completely impervious to any storm that's blowing by our windows or in our homes. We thank you and praise you for that. You are the stability of our times. And I thank you today. Got a huge amount of stuff to cover. I'll say more about that in just a minute. So be with me. May your grace and power and even some of your eloquence, I ain't got none except from you, be with us today. In Jesus' name we pray. We love you. Amen. Okay, buddy, can I go to work? What do you think? He's not a kissing dog. No. Man, no. That wouldn't be right. Anyway, sorry. I have no idea what's going to happen next. Part 3. This is a huge one. As I get into the research, I don't always know. You're the best puppy ever. I don't always know how much we'll get in here. I had every intention to keeping this down about 3,000 words, and it ballooned to 5,500, and I kept chopping and chopping. The reason, apart from my personality defect for thoroughness and length and wordiness, I've said it before. I want you guys, if I do nothing else, is to retrain us, starting with me, to think critically about what's going on out there. And I'll give you some examples of how that doesn't take place very much anymore as people try to invent ways, explanatory frameworks for what's going on. All right, title of our talk today, the main one. You okay? Oh, he's playing. There you go. You hear him? See? That's his. Look at this. That's a happy dog. That's a born again, spirit filled happy dog. Okay. Anyway, you can have the same. No, I'm nuts today because it's been a stormy morning. Notes on the crying need for Christian leadership in America, and everybody said, "Oh yeah." A study of pro-Trump wolves among the sheep of God's pasture. I named 5 of them last week. Might do a little more of that today. Part 3, the impact. That's why this got so long. How can I, in an hour, summarize the impact of decades and even centuries of waves of opposing ideas, opposing spiritual movements, opposing groups to what God's trying to do in America and in the church today. So it got a little long, so what I'm going to do more than ever, I'm going to read a whole lot less and bounce around, paraphrase a whole lot more. Got to do it. Okay, scripture for today. One that's very, very familiar to us, but again, if I'm hearing anything from the boss, it took on special weight, gravitas, relevance, and immediacy as I read it in preparation for today's study. It's from 2 Timothy 3:1. But understand this, that in the last days will come or set in perilous times of great stress and trouble, hard to deal with and hard to bear. I think I can say collectively for all of us, we can relate. Now that was written 2,000 some years ago, but it was a prophecy. It was about this time, these last times, being vastly more intense than when they were written and when they were proclaim. So some quotations, again, from unusual sources. I'm not sure there's a Christian among them here, but that may not be important at all if we're striking the truth. First one is from a Roman historian, politician, and author. I had not read him before I did the research, of something called the Conspiracy of Cataline, or Cataline, written in about 50 BC. And he has some things to say that bear directly upon, and I'm going to talk probably several times, or mention several times, January 6, 2021 in Washington. The more I consider and ponder and reflect on it, that's a massively huge day in the history of the United States. Something happened that day more than what we just saw taking place on our television sets or our iPhones. Here's what Sallust, whose actual name was Gaius Sallustius Crispu, wrote back then. Frequent mobs, seditions, and at last civil wars became common, while a few leading men on whom the masses were dependent affected supreme power under the seemly pretense of seeking the good of the Senate and of the people. Citizens were judged good or bad without reference to their loyalty to the Republic at all, for all were equally corrupt. But the wealthy and dangerously powerful were esteemed good citizens because they maintained the existing state of things. If that isn't as true today, then it's time for me to go drive an ice cream truck and choose a different career. And some don't write to me and say, that's a good idea, Dr. Kelly. That is so true. We had a fancy name for that back in the grad school, status conferral, that your status was conferred on the basis of your wealth, your position, your title, your color, the way you look, talk, and appeal to the leaders, etc., etc. Been around ever since Adam and Eve, and it's still around today in spades, I think, in America. Second one is from somebody I've quoted before, Susie Kassem. She's spiritual. I don't know if she's Christian, but she writes some pretty good stuff. This is from Rise Up and Salute the Sun. I think it's a series published in 2011. Most of the time, we see only what we want to see. True. Or what others tell us to see. That's her point. Instead of really investigate to see what is really there, we embrace illusions only because we are presented with the illusion that they are embraced by the majority. I won't read the rest. This is pungent stuff. This is rich stuff. Why? She finishes, because since the earliest days of our youth, we have been conditioned to accept that the direction of the herd on the one hand, or of the authority on the other, is always right. Wow. Wow. Finally, from somebody I don't always agree with at all, a former Secretary of State, I believe, Madeleine Albright, but she wrote a book in 2018. I've not read the book, just excerpts. Fascism, a Warning. She comes from Eastern European lineage, where she has a particular sensitivity, as do the Jews, for understanding, discerning, and being quicker to the trigger on red flags raised that are very important to recognize. And again, I've alluded to this theme several times, and to this book by an incredible intellectual Christian thinker, Dr. Gene Edward Veith Jr., wrote a number of wonderful books, not the least of which, the littlest known of which, back in 1993, I think, Modern Fascism, Liquidating the Judeo-Christian Worldview. It's happening right now, a lot longer ago than he first wrote the book. We cannot, Albright writes, we cannot, of course, expect every leader to possess the wisdom of an Abraham Lincoln or Mandela's largeness of soul. But when we think about what questions might be most useful to ask, perhaps we should begin by discerning what our prospective leaders believe, especially today. Believe it worthwhile for us to hear. For those who cherish freedom, the answers that we will address to our potential leaders will provide grounds for reassurance or a warning we dare not ignore. We've had so many warnings in the last 4 or 5 years, off the scale. My little calculator couldn't add them up. Scores a day for 365 days per year times 4.5, do the math. Warning after warning after warning, and I've made the case rightly or wrongly, we go back to about the turn of the century in 1900 for those warnings to have kicked in earnest, or begun in earnest, and I don't think we've heard them yet. First thoughts. Some time ago I wrote about the butterfly effect, and that's going to have a lot to do with everything we cover today, as you'll see in just a moment. Quick definition from Merriam-Webster: a property of chaotic systems such as the atmosphere by which small changes in initial conditions can lead to large-scale and unpredictable variation in the future state of the system conditions. It's really common sense. What happens over here, however minuscule it seems, I'm going to give some examples in just a second, can have dramatic effects way down the road. I know in the space program in NASA, I read articles many years ago about how a miscalculation of no more than 0.011 degree calculating the trajectory of the space vehicle can end up putting that thing outside, hundreds and thousands of miles outside its target. So little changes here, big impacts later, very possibly. 3 silly examples really from my childhood. Remember my first Bible, got it packed away somewhere, a little tiny thing, little King James Bible, had written in pencil from Baba. Baba, I have no memory of, except my mom told me that was my first babysitter when I was 1, 2, 3 years old. And she spent time with me. Isn't it interesting that at that age, I don't think my mom and dad were Christians at all at that point. And she gave me my first Bible, had little lines under it, later underlines in it. So I write, however contrived this might be. A babysitter we may have had at age 4 or 3 or 2 who planted a seed of the gospel in us with wonderful consequences 30 years later. Nothing escapes the notice of our God or his plan. Scout's still having a good time playing in his blanket and flipping things up in the air. Second one, Purdue versus Bowling Green University. I remember in grad school, I was told, you got to go to Purdue. That's the Cadillac of the political communication field, la, 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 la. And I ended up, for a lot of reasons I'm not going to go into, I probably mentioned it before, going to Bowling Green and didn't go to Purdue. Now, that choice in 1970 has had profound impact on me down the road here in 2021. And just an example, and I have one here titled Uncle Don. Uncle Don was a rough and tumble Korean War Navy veteran. Liked his hooch, liked to drink. He was a rascal. He'd tease me all the time. We'd wrestle around. He's a tough guy. He's a good guy. Became a cop later until he was wounded in a shootout and had to go into early retirement. He's gone to be with the Lord. But I was 11 years old down in El Paso, Texas. He was visiting. Pulled out a little pint or half pint of cream of Kentucky whiskey. Said, "Here, boy, I'm going to teach you about how to drink." Yeah, he's lucky he stayed alive when my mom found out about that. 35 years later, all hell breaks loose in my life because of an thoughtless, I was going to say well-intentioned uncle did that. Which reminds me of another term from graduate school, God and goal path multiplicity. Big fancy word I learned from Dr. Raymond Tucker, a scientific principle that says one can reach one's primary goal way down the road in life by countless number of pathways. Because life is not a straight line, like a regression coefficient statistic. It goes all over the place. We mess up all the time. The beauty of that is what I call the Smithian hand, invisible hand above us. When we're called of God, he keeps funneling us back onto that path. We're not aware of it most of the time. And he keeps getting hit. That's his faithful hand on our lives. And I'm not sure why I threw that in there. Frankly, it has meaning at least to God, maybe not to us. The maxim, then I summarize, our initial conditions here, and a lot of us had initial conditions that were painful, hard, brutal. I won't go into mine, but there were 2 or 3 events in my childhood that were shattering, that impacted me later on down the road, as well as little events, little things. Oh, gosh. It's not a little thing, but it really is. I finally convinced my mom to give me a Daisy Pump BB gun, and I was going to be the big hunter. I went out in the backyard and I shot and killed a robin redbreast. I was probably 10 years old. I haven't been able to hunt since. I must have wept for a month. I remember in the backyard where Dad was growing rose bushes, I was just weeping all the time, and Mom helped me. We got 2 little ice cream sticks, and I dug a little grave, and I planted I put the little birdie in the grave and planted a little ice cream stick cross on it, said a little prayer, and it's funny how we remember those things that impact us later. And that's not as casting aspersion on you hunters. I watch the Alaska homesteader shows all the time. They're out hunting and fishing. I think it's awesome. Now I'm going to turn to, I don't know how this is going today. I've got so much on my mind right now. Father, help me to focus. And I know a lot of you have a lot on your plates and minds too. I'm doing fine, but sometimes I'll just lie in bed late at night and just events, experiences, news, it's just a lot going on. I'm going to turn to a guy for about the next 5 minutes or more, Dr. Richard Weaver. I've mentioned him before. One of the most important books I've ever come across. Published in 1948, Ideas Have Consequences. This is his magnum opus. This book has changed probably millions of lives, especially among certainly tens of thousands of lives of those who think and write and teach. What he did, I think, was gather hundreds, if not a few thousand years of the wisdom of men and compended them into what is that, like 100, look at how skinny that is. 187 pages. This is a horrible, horrible comparison. Look, mine's only 163 pages, Dr. Weaver. But he's taught at the University of Chicago. A lot of incredible minds came out or through University of Chicago. Alan Bloom, so many others. So I'm going to give you a little bio of Richard Weaver because the very name of the book gives away the story. Ideas have consequences. One little idea over here in, 32 AD, among a group of, 12 or so dusty Jewish guys, has changed the world 2,000 years later. This is a monumental, and the whole thesis is caught in the title. Ideas have, I think later on here, and I'm going to skip around, I got too much to read. As I taught my class, ideas have consequences, and huge ideas have massive consequences. I'm one of those in terms of the several schools of thought of history. I believe more than anything else, great men and women drive history, but not without being accompanied by their great ideas, whether we're talking about Karl Marx, Jesus Christ, Adolf Hitler, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Plato. Huge ideas drive history. I'll say more about that. I'm chewing off way more than we can digest today, than I can digest. So allow me to stumble around in some of my self-created darkness here. This helps. I give a biography, a simple Wikipedia biography for Dr. Weaver. He promoted traditionalist conservatism having been raised with strong moral values. That's really important for a thinker. Weaver considered the Christian religion, using language like our founders used, as the foundation for family and civilization. Without that, he would argue, they don't have that in the quote, that a civilization, a nation, a people, a household, an individual cannot negotiate this foul world. Can't be done with that successfully. His appreciation for religion is evident in speeches he gave early, while even as an undergraduate at the Christian Endeavor Society. So I wanted to say that simply because his Christian faith, he's a Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian, massively directed his thinking as a young man, who, for a time, as I did, as a young man, as a socialist, not quite a Marxist, but a socialist. He abandoned that pretty good as he filtered it through his biblical framework. And so a couple of his ideas here. He begins his dissertation with this from the foreword, and I quote, "It is a work of philosophy to the extent that it tries to analyze many features of modern disintegration," we can relate, "by referring them to a first cause." This mess that we're in right now has a first cause, more accurately, a number of first causes. And in 40 minutes, I'm going to try to outline some of that and look at, in grisly detail, some of the consequences of that. But that's his thesis. Got a lot more in the quote. We live in a cause-effect universe. Nothing happens over here without something having preceded and fueled it over here. Makes common sense. Arguing further, as did so many conservators of traditional Western thought, that the world, this is back in 48, has lost its center. I love that phrase. Has lost its center. Robert Bellah, the brilliant sociologist, phrased it this way. America and the West have lost their sense of place. We've lost our center. Who's our center? Yahweh, Yeshua, then David. Without that center, that cornerstone, that lodestone, that rock I opened with, all you can do as a nation or as a household or as an individual is wander all over the place, usually into destruction. And that's really the big ideas that we're dealing with today, and hopefully I can make some sense of it. The point is, Weaver saw even back in 48 that there were serious fractures in the edifice of America's founding ideas. He saw it back in 48, and I've taken it all the way back to 1900. And there are some scholars, I think Paul Johnson, the British Catholic historian, brilliant guy, in his books, takes us back to 1830 as a major pivot point for what was going on in the 1800s and later with the publication of Darwin's Origin of the Species and a bunch of other stuff. So anyway, I'm meandering. That's what old professors do. We just meander. Sometimes I refer to myself as a wandering Jew. Summary. I love this introduction by Ted Wright, writing for an excellent conservative online journal, Cross-Examined, who gives us a little bit more information about Dr. Weaver. The main thesis of Weaver's book is that philosophy, or worldview, undergirds all society and every individual. We all have a philosophy of life. We all have a worldview. Some of us are more aware of it and piece it together more systematically than others. What we believe about reality matters. Boy, what we say or think is real matters. Think about a certain presidential spokeswoman who said, there are alternative facts to the reality that you're describing, and on and on and on. In 1948, many intellectuals in Europe and America were left dumbfounded as to how such atrocities could have been committed by Germany in World War II. In the 1930s, Germany was one of the most literate nations in the world. So it wasn't that Germans were ill-informed or unintelligent. After all, Germany had produced such brilliant musical luminaries as Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, the hugely influential philosophers like Hegel and Kant, and others. The problem, as Weaver saw it, wasn't literacy or education. It was the kind of philosophy that a culture believed in. When I was in graduate school in the year 1294, as the Boers were storming Spain, I was on the 7th floor of a library at Bowling Green University in my little carrel, and I came across a book, I think I told the story months ago, maybe last year, by George Kelly, The Psychology of Personal Constructs. And I opened this is 1971, opened it, and he quoted Proverbs 23:7a, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is, so he becomes, so he behaves, so he speaks. So anyway, all this is jamming together, and much more lucidly, Dr. Weaver puts it together in this a whole lot of quotes here that you can read. I really want you to read this. This is kind of a pro seminar for you for free, summarizing about 30 years of my learning as a student of this stuff, scholar, whatever. He talks a lot about the philosophy of nominalism. What is nominalism? It is defined by Weaver is that which denies universals. Terms like man, woman, tree, house have a real existence, but somebody says, so what? What's the problem? Weaver says this: the issue here. This is the part that's pretty clear. The issue ultimately involved is whether there is a source of truth higher than us scrums down here digging around in the dust. Are there universals, along with particulars? I think Aristotle and Plato's great debate about such things. I'm not prepared to go into that. But are there archetypes, I think Plato would call them? Are there really real things from which we derive understanding down here? Types up here, shadows down here. He, of course, believed that. And then he said, as the review goes, and the answer to the question is decisive for one's view of the nature and destiny of humankind. If you don't think those things exist, one of the phrases people use now, well, just go and define your truth. Your truth is just as good as my truth, and Zelda's truth over here, Fred's truth over there. Well, he doesn't know what he's doing, but that's his truth. That's chaos. Not only intellectual chaos, that leads to world chaos. That leads to wars. That leads to death. God knew what he was doing when he set in place in us the ability for language and thought. And this gets me to a conversation I'm having right now with Sandy online about some of these things. Oh, I got so much going on in me right now. Who is it that this is going to sound so pompous? One of the great poets. I don't think it was David Thoreau. The other guy, I can't think. I contradict myself. So be it. I contain multitudes. How's that for hubris? But I certainly contradict myself in trying to explain some of this stuff. Weaver's consequences. I don't know why, but I took his arguments all the way back to Adam and Eve in the garden. Let's see what I wrote here. I got to figure out what I'm going to say. His epochal point is that if mankind does not recognize what our Creator has designed for us as a means for a truly good life through a reasonable, rational life, then we're lost. How many of you had the thought that America's lost its mind? It's lost its center. It's lost its sense of place and meaning and significance in the universe. But I tell you, I read things online now by ostensible Christian men and women, leaders. What they're saying is insane. Insanity, one of insanity's fundamental definitions is the loss of the ability to understand reality as it actually is. So you live in an alternative reality. We're hearing that a lot in the news. People are living in a fantasy, a mythos, a fable, and they're inventing it along the way. I'm going to talk about the form that takes by the time I finish here today. Genesis 2:17, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and blessing and calamity you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. I'm not at all prepared to go into the deep structure theology of that, except I looked up a few commentaries, and it wasn't so much they would tell us and teach us, that it was the particular fruit that they were eating from that tree that gave them, universal like knowledge of good and evil. No, it was a test of obedience. From the get-go, from the beginning, whether it's Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, whether it's Adam and Eve in the garden, or David in his kingship regarding Saul. It's all about obedience. I've made more of obedience in the last 2 years than I have ever even used the word in all my 40 years of walking with the Lord. There's a reason for that. God is calling in all his chits. We've played Christianity for a long time in America. Now we get down into the weeds, feet on the ground, heads steady now. And we're going to talk about obedience, following real salvation, obedience. Not to earn salvation by obedience, but to demonstrate salvation through our obedience. That's the fruit of what we are supposed to be as sons and daughters of God. Most scholars tell us that the eating was not so much, again, about the food, but about obedience, as I have argued nearly annoyingly. I've got so many pastors mad at me. Just dealt with one this morning. What did he say? And he was on LinkedIn. And he said, Cliff, you shouldn't talk like that. Telling the truth. You shouldn't talk like that. You're going to upset people. You do it in public and everything. I'm sorry. I wrote him back as restrained a fashion as I could. Man has been ravenously eating of that tree of disobedience for thousands of years. And again, for us, 120 years or more. And it all, listen to me now. Listen to me. And all of it, all of that sedition, all of that disobedience, all of that rebellion came to full fruition in Washington, D.C. at the nation's capital on January 6th of this year. Mark well that day. I'm going to mark it about 3 more times before I'm done today. It was vastly more important than I first realized, in my view. The teaching is from, again, 2 Timothy 3:1, but understand this, that in the last days will come perilous times, because in former days, all this stuff was going on. Undermining the Judeo-Christian foundation for everything. This is, this era of Antichrist or the last times or the last days. This is an hour come full flower with at least 6,000 years preceding it of human disobedience, with 250 years of disobedience in gradations, increasingly, from the American experiment in the last 120 years, especially. And I gotta say, again, I repeat myself a lot. In the last 5 years, America has never, and her church has never been this, what's the word? Renegade in all of its history. This is insanity, what we're seeing around us in the church. Had a dear brother, brilliant, eloquent, well-schooled pastor teach just last night on Micah. I think there's 7 or 8 chapters. And he reviewed it brilliantly. Micah's entire calling was to a disobedient Israel, Jerusalem in the south, Israel in the north, and the prophets Isaiah and Micah and one other, I can't remember, were all prophesying, sky's going to fall unless you guys get it together. And they ignored. And he's reading almost word for word, line by line, a description of America right now, beloved, right now. and he couldn't make the leap. Historicism, preterism. It leaves the pastor and the scholar only to tell you endlessly about the past. You know, how long can we do that? To know the exact measure and meter of the wall of Jericho. How this word is of no use to us unless we can open it to the times. Pastors, make the application, make the leap, not Kierkegaard's leap, because this leap is reasoned. Not a leap into uncertainty, a leap into reason and truth, stability, insight, and most importantly, wisdom. Wisdom. And so my pastor friend, brilliant, knows 1,000 times more about the basis of Jewish, Hebrew, and Christian theology. But I mean, at some point, and he did, God bless him, he made an allusion to January 6th, and he said, and people were raising the Jesus saves at the same time they're banging down and breaking windows. And then he said this, and this is not to demean, he's not going to watch this anyway, but if he does, I hope he understands. I say this in love, but utter frustration. He said then, now I'm not here as your pastor to tell you who the good guys and the bad guys were. And in the back of my throat, if not you, beloved pastor, then who? This choice of or inability to make those distinctions between good and evil, right and wrong, are the basis of a biblical worldview. If we can't make those choices, never judge. We are lost. And, by the way, we're lost. Except for the remnant, we're lost. I gotta go. The big idea. Mankind, and more specifically the United States of America, have been recklessly sowing to the wind for all the time I've described, and are, in my view, and that of Dr. Weaver and a whole lot of other students of history and scripture, we are now reaping the whirlwind. One of the images I was going to make was this big, horrendous whirlwind coming upon America. I got a very different one. The image you're seeing is much more relevant and pertinent to our talk today. So I break down each of those two terms. Perilous times, from the Greek word chalepos, meaning hard to bear, troublesome, harsh, fierce, dangerous, grievous, savage, furious, all the stuff we're experiencing right now. And this is only the beginning. This is your birth pains. Aren't I a happy encourager? From events that reduce one's strength. And they do. And that took me to Daniel's prophecy of a long time ago in the 7th chapter, 25th verse. I haven't read this until recently. And he, that is the Antichrist or the spirit of Antichrist, depending on where we are in history, shall speak words against the Most High God, and shall, look at the phrase, shall wear out the saints of the Most High. I can't count the number of times you guys have said, I'm just so tired of this. Christian, non-Christian, we're so tired of COVID. We're so tired of Trump. We're so tired of the uncertainty. We're so tired of wearing a mask. We're so tired. We're just so tired, Lord. Wear out, it's from the Hebrew bela. To wear out, to wear away, used primarily in a mental or emotional sense. It's in here where we get tired. And it causes one, listen to this, if you don't take that tiredness to the Lord every day, it leads to apostasy. What you do? I'm done. I'm done. Now, I've said that before, but I didn't really mean it. I can't be done with God almost any more than he can be done with me. Charles Ellicott says the apostle had warned Timothy not to allow fear of oncoming peril and trouble to paralyze his efforts in the master's cause. For the Lord's true servant should never lose heart. We do for a little tiny while. And we run a course, right? Beat a path to the Lord. I'm losing heart today. I had to pray before I got on camera today. I was feeling really down today. I'm overwhelmed by all this stuff sometimes, Lord. I can't do this. So I just grabbed my wife's hand after a little spat about money. And we prayed. And it just got much better almost instantly. We can't afford to let our hearts sink to the ground and just leave it there, walk away. Can't do it. Dangerous. Okay, that's Ellicott. Benson points out another commentary that in the scripture, Paul is foretelling of a future time through the pernicious influence of corrupt doctrines propagated by false teachers. Many would become so wicked that it would become dangerous to the truly pious to even be around them. Do you hear the sages? Do you understand? You can't hang out with people who call themselves Christians and are seditious at their very heart of conduct. You can't do it. Jesus taught it. The apostles taught it. The commentaries taught it. This is wisdom. It sounds harsh. It's your very life. Remember, I'm talking about hypocrites, people who call themselves Christian. I'm not talking about the unsaved, the unwashed. They need us. That's our whole commission in Matthew 28. Oh, let me read this, even though I'm going to run out of time and skip a bunch of stuff. This is from my beloved William MacDonald. The apostle, now in this passage of Timothy, the apostle now gives Timothy a description of conditions that will exist in the world prior to the Lord's coming. That's what makes this age so exciting, a little more exciting than some of us bargained for. That's why I say we're privileged to be here. I really feel that down in my bones. This is the big kahuna, as we said back in California in the beach days. This is el partido viejito peloto más grande. This is the big one. This is the show, the big show. This is the run-up to Messiah's return and events that will just blow minds, literally and figuratively, more than any time in history. Anyway, here's what he says. The remarkable thing, after citing Romans 1, the remarkable thing about this time, listen to this. I have never read this, ever. The remarkable thing is that the very conditions that exist in their savagery and uncivilized state will characterize, I wrote this in block letters, professing believers in the last days. We're not talking about the liberals, the Democrats, the socialists, the atheists, the agnostics, and the Rosicrucians and everybody else. We're talking about us. Us. I think I quote down here, Pogo. We have met the enemy, and he is us. We're the reason this nation is in the trash can, not them. And that's why I back off from beating the Democrats up and that's nonsense, and it's unbiblical. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. They need salvation. We need discipline and transparency and integrity and character and honor. All that stuff we've lost, along with a sense of place, along with a loss of center. It's us, pastor. I will give my pastor credit. He said, it was somebody else. I'll read later. He needs to call us to repentance before we, take the log out of our eye, before we worry about the slivers that all over it. It's our church that has the bloody logs in our eyes. Pastors, it's us. Why do I talk so strenuously about Christians who defile the name and the character of Christ? Why do I talk so strong? There was another who talked a lot stronger than I ever will. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! And that's the way he spoke it. I'm convinced. For you are like tombs that have been whitewashed, which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones. Everything filthy and impure. Jesus said that in that manner. I challenge you to tell me if he said it. Oh, woe to you guys, man. You're not doing very well. Give me a break. State of the Union. This is kind of the meat of this particular part. Oh, God, I've got stuff on fascism. Let me just go to one. Well, jeez. Let me quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. That sets the. I scared Scott. My wife's banging on the door. You're yelling again. This is a quote from Democracy in America from 1835 or so, in his 2-volume work that I had not read before either. I love the discovery of new stuff in the sense it's not new, but I haven't seen it before. Listen to de Tocqueville. Tyranny in democratic republics does not proceed in the same way as you might think. It ignores the body and goes straight for the soul. The master no longer says, "You will think as I do, or you will die." That's how we typically think about tyranny. Listen. In his nascent description of what I would consider to be fascism, he said this he probably wrote it in 1830. "You are free not to think as I do," says the ruler. "You may keep your life, your property, as fascism allows, and everything else. But from this day forth, you shall be as a stranger among us. You will retain your civic privileges, but they will be of no use to you. For if you seek the votes of your fellow citizens, they will withhold them. And if you seek only their esteem, they will feign to refuse even that. You will remain among men, but you will forfeit your rights to humanity. When you approach your fellow creatures, they will shun you as one who is impure, and even those who believe in your innocence will abandon you, lest they too be shunned in turn. Go in peace. I will not take your life, but the life I leave you with is worse than death." That is the most magnificent definition of tyranny I've ever read in my 76 years. What's happening in America right now, if I could give it a name, it's not quite fascism. It's not quite tyranny. I call it soft tyranny. Soft fascism. I used to call it fascism with a friendly face, but the friendly faces are gone. So we're down the road now. Journalist Molly Holmstead, who I've quoted before, says this: if you happen to be one of those who dares to take a stand, in this context, with a church and a nation saying, we don't want to hear that. And finally, she writes, there were less conservative evangelicals in the midst of all this turmoil who found that this moment only reinforced, I think they're referring to January 6th, I'm not sure yet. Yeah, it was right after January 6th. And finally, there were less conservative evangelicals, I put Selah. Good Lord, what is that? Who found that this moment only reinforced previous stances that they had taken against elements of Trumpism, stances that often alienated them from their supporters, their community, their families, and their friends. She cites Beth Moore, the founder of Living Proof Ministries, again, who tweeted, I don't know the Jesus some have paraded and waved around in the middle of this treachery in January 6th. I don't know that Jesus. Neither do I. They may be acting in the name of some other Jesus, but that's not the Jesus of the Gospels, and it is not. I have so much more I've said here and written, you'll have to read it. And as I was messaging a friend of mine on LinkedIn who I used to work with at Focus on the Family as an administrator, he's also writing some blogs. We almost wrote the same thing on publication within 2 or 3 days of each other. Because you know what I'm hearing? You know what I heard as I watched the crowd? That you'll see in the image that I put on attached to this commentary? Barabbas! Give us Barabbas! We don't want this Jesus. What have We need of him. We have our own Jesus. We've created him in our own image. So give us Barabbas, and you do with this Jesus whatever you wish. That is the moment we're in, beloved. I know that Gary, my friend, a brilliant historian, by the way, rough cut like I am, I know that God let me hear that as I heard it as a reinforcement. That's what the church for Trump is doing. And it is beyond sedition. It is beyond blasphemous. It's a death knell for anybody who joins that. I'll let you define what death is all about and destruction. I then give 21, a little checklist of 21 signs of an American church on life support. You can read them. See, there they are. You see the little numbers? Taken from, actually, it's from an article by Reverend Timothy Porter, writing for Sermon Central, or published in Sermon Central. It's really a good list. He borrows from Pew Research and others, as I do often. And just read the list. If you're not convinced that we're in steep decline as a church, as an institution, as I often say, reading is good for you. Got to get to the end here, and I'm just about out of time. In sum, what we're witnessing, beloved, and I've skipped over so much, is the death of Christianity in America. I don't have time to pull punches. That's what it is. Good Lord. Sanctuaries are become echo chambers of talking points from politicians. And all I can think of is Jesus' remonstrance in Matthew 6:24, no one, beloved, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, which is money, possessions, fame, status, political gain, or whatever is valued more than the Lord. You cannot do it. Final Impact. Got that from a sci-fi movie. I'll finish with reading a quote, and then I got to shut down. This is the longest quote in the study. This is from David Broder, a secular liberal intellectual who I admire, who writes 10 times more truth than all our bunch on the so-called conservative Christian right in a single piece. From the New York Times, January 14th, 2021. Over the last, and he's writing, some of you follow Jeremiah Johnson, a pastor, minister, evangelist who was one of the absolute few who came out after January 6th and said a number of right things. I was pretty hard on him. I got to back off. Listen to this real quick, and then we'll close because I just got pages to go. Over the last 72 hours, I have received, this is Jeremiah Johnson, Kendall Casey Enru, you're the charter member of this club. And I defer to you for your courage, your stamina, your wisdom, your sense of humor, at your husband's expense quite often, which I love. Over the last 72 hours, Jeremiah Johnson says, I have received multiple death threats. I stopped counting at 73. And thousands upon thousands of emails from Christians, Trump Christians, saying the nastiest and most vulgar things I have ever heard toward my family and my ministry. I had some of mine say, I'm going to, give me your address. I'm going to take you and your family out. Spirit of Trump. Isn't that precious? I have been labeled a coward, a sellout, a traitor to the Holy Spirit, and cussed out at least 500 times. This is the beginning of a Facebook post from Sunday by the conservative preacher Jeremiah Johnson on January 7th. The responses were swift and vicious. As he wrote in that later Facebook post, I have been flabbergasted at the barrage of continued conspiracy theories being sent every minute our way and the pure hatred being unleashed to my great heartache. I'm convinced parts of the prophetic charismatic movement are far sicker than I have ever thought before. I agree. You're sick. You're sick and you need one physician, but your pride keeps you from him. There's another piece of this that quotes David French. I've already posted some of his work on my page. Who refers to all of this as self-idolatry, if not idolatry of some other stuff. And then I conclude with, and I don't have time to go into detail, this rotten saga of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican congresswoman who just got her committee stripped away from her because of the things she believes in. And there's a bunch of quotes here. You can read it. 199 House Republicans voted to protect her. 11 said no, she ought to be stripped of her committees. So I end with a rather astounding conclusion. I can find it in all this. A lot of stuff about Q, her views on QAnon. Then a quote here, one of the most disturbing violent conspiracy Congresswoman Greene engaged with in May 2018 is the Frazzle Ship conspiracy, which exists deep within the conspiracy rabbit hole. The conspiracy baselessly contends that Hillary Clinton and former Clinton aide Huma Abedin were videotaped sexually assaulting a child and then ripping off the child's face to wear as a mask in a satanic blood sacrifice. The theory then alleges that Clinton ordered an assassination hit against the police officer who found the footage, named Frazzle Drip, according to reporting from Media Matters, and Ed M. Steck and Andrew Kaczynski. I gotta finish. I'm gonna just go totally off script. I believe the QAnon white nationalist alt-right garbage that is preparing right now to try to ignite a civil war is becoming a church. It's becoming a religion. I've listened, I don't know, dozens and dozens of interviews, commentaries by those who believe in this garbage. They sound religious. They're all wide-eyed, bleary-eyed, like it's a God thing. And they're using the name of Jesus, and I'll tell you, I would not want to walk in their shoes 1 inch. We're up against demons, beloved. I think I quote 1 Timothy 4, 1 and 2 as I describe all this that I've blown all the way through here. You read it for yourselves. But the Holy Spirit explicitly and unmistakably declares that in later times some will turn away from the faith. Matthew 24 says many, paying attention instead to deceitful and seductive spirits and the doctrines of demons. QAnon is the core of that, along with white nationalism. And they call it Christian. Misled by the hypocrisy of liars, whose consciences are seared as with a branding iron, leaving them incapable of ethical functioning. They are lost. They are lost. Some of you are praying for family members, and don't stop praying. But you're going to have to turn up the volume and get militant in your prayers. And crack the edifice of the seduction of the spirits of demons in their lives. And finally, what do I got? 1 minute. If this continues to take place in the American church, if this becomes a viable political and spiritual force in the next months and years ahead, and turns into what would have every appearance to be a church beyond a cult, cult church, and America accedes to it and still will not stop it, I see America becoming a very different city than the one we talked about, city on a hill. I'll offer some slight evidence for this, and I got to close. I believe we're looking more and more like Babylon every single day. I'm very hesitant to say things like that. Revelation 18:8 says, For this reason, in a single day, her plagues, afflictions, calamities will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire and completely consumed, for strong and powerful is the Lord God who judges her. So my advice, depart from all that, you wicked. Stay with Christ, stay with his remnant, find members to it, find people who believe like that, who hold on to orthodoxy, who hold on to the canon with their very lives, and hang with them. Father, in the name of Jesus, I've taught tougher today than ever before. Every time I go to you and say, Lord, shall I dial it back? Shall I dial it back? I don't hear your voice, but it's as if you say, you don't have time to dial it back. So there it is. Somebody, let somebody in the church that thinks they're Christians by acceding to the rot of Trumpist Christianity, get out of there. In Jesus' name, we pray, and I thank you. I didn't do this like I wanted to, but hope you can use it. In Christ's name, amen. Went over time by a minute. Sorry about that. I'm trying to hold the ground. We'll deal with the last one on solutions, happily, for the last series. Love you. God bless.